All right, welcome to the IO Soapbox. I'm joined here today by Dr. Fred Oswald. Dr. Oswald is a professor over at Rice University, and he's joining us today from his house, as I join you today from my house, to talk to us about IO psychology, adverse impact, and kind of other topics of passion for him in those areas. So welcome, Fred.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and look forward to talking on the soapbox here for a little bit.
Woo! And of course, my children immediately dropped pencils on the floor.
Hey, you're creating the at-home scenario here.
Really, right? Like, let us demonstrate work-life imbalance. So, Fred, could you tell us a little bit about the work that you do and what you love about it?
Sure, I'll make it brief, or try to, but I do a lot of work around psychological measurement of individual differences, and that sounds pretty abstract, so let me nail it down. And you know, there are various domains of, we're psychologists, we measure things we can't see. And so, we try to get at, in IO psychology, job knowledge and motivation and interest, and, on the predictor side. On the criterion side, the sorts of things we're trying to predict are like job performance and teamwork and engagement. And there are challenges around how we measure all of these things. What are the ways in which we measure it? How do we do scoring? How do we ensure it's fair, reliable, valid, predictive, and also legal? So it's a lot of interrelated issues around testing and selection that I do, and it's challenging. It's exciting. I love getting my grad students involved, and it's about doing the research, but it's also about stretching ourselves intellectually and supporting each other in terms of community. And it's great. I love it. So I'm happy to take that any direction you like on the soapbox.
I was going to say, you gave me a lot to work with there. I heard a couple of different so I heard in some of what you just said, this love of measurement, which I agree with. I find the idea of measuring these kind of deep, kind of fuzzy psychological concepts, what we care about, how we approach it, to be just a beautiful, fascinating part of the work that we do. I also heard a piece in there that had to do essentially with like mentoring, working with each other. I heard a piece around community, and of course around, you talked a lot about selection and adverse impact. I'm curious, what is community in IO psychology? What is that for you?
Well, it's community in IO psychology happens, of course, at multiple levels depending on your substantive interests, right? We have communities of interest around particular topics, like I do selection, but there's recruiting, there's diversity, there's leadership, right? There's safety, teamwork, the list goes on, right, in terms of what IO psychologists can do. So that's a substantive way of creating communities. There's also communities of backgrounds, right? You could be early career, you could, depending on your demographic orientation, or, there are, I could say cultural identities, but really just identities that people share and build upon and kind of have as a foundation as they move forward. So, obviously, our interest groups, we have a new disabilities group. There's women's, WIN is what it stands for. It's something like, I'm going to butcher it. It's something like Women's Information Network. Or
information.
Go ahead.
I can't remember. Is it the Women's Initiative or Women's Information?
See, I don't know, but
no!
But the point is to strengthen. Yeah. Well, the point is to strengthen our communities, especially in places where we need to, right? And where we've been lacking and where we need to move forward. And so it's not that these groups are working in isolation, but just like life itself, right? It's a balance between identity among people that share our common backgrounds and beliefs, and reaching out to each other and embracing our diverse beliefs at the same time, right? That's always a balance I think about in IO settings, actually, right? You want to respect people's backgrounds and identity and pride that they take in those identities, but then you also want to reach beyond those to, assure mutual understanding and frankly, I mean, there's always we want to on the organizational side, there's effectiveness to be had in doing so. So it's sort of, to quote Dilbert, it's sort of a win-win in that respect.
I love that. So as you were talking, what I was thinking about, because you're talking about all of these differences within IO, right? The diverse communities within IO. And so my next question is, who is IO for? Who should be in IO? I mean, and the reason why I ask that is so many people who will watch this channel are people who are thinking about getting into IO psychology. And part of what they're asking themselves is this the right field for me? And does the field want me? So who is IO for?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm glad you're asking, because I think, I think could take on more responsibility as a psychologist to spread the good word, because there are so many options out there. So what do we have to offer, right? How do you make distinctions as a consumer? Like, when you buy peanut butter, you might buy a certain kind, right? And how's it distinct? I don't know if IO is crunchy or smooth, but we're different from, if you want to get an MBA. An MBA is obviously useful. It's informed by other areas of business. IO psychology is business oriented, but it's informed by other areas of psychology, right? The business school, like a PhD program in business, is very valuable, but it's very academically oriented, right? People who graduate from business schools, maybe that it's somewhat ironic, but they go into academics. And so if you're wanting to be a practitioner, really, an IO psychology degree gives you that purchase, especially, at the master's level. It's a very viable, as some of the audience might know better than me, a very viable and valuable job. But the point is that's supported by IO psychology. There's not really an equivalent, at least not in large numbers, in a business school. They tend to do more academic training at the PhD level. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding of the ecosystem. And there are, I don't know, I think another point to be made for some people anyway is, people think psychology is only clinical psychology, right? And there's so many other areas to go into, and this is a plug for not just IO psychology, but just to encourage students to really explore the options out there, because there's so many exciting possibilities. Health psychology, right? Working with medical field. There's occupational health, which would kind of blend IO psychology and health. There's human factors, where people look at, I work with human factors psychologists actually on like usability of systems. So we have a project on autonomous cars, and do people trust the system, right? Or do people trust voting systems? So there's a lot of hybrid ways to go, but also, we would love for you to be an IO, but there are other areas as well. But one of the whole reason I got into IO psychology was through exploring. I was not born wanting to do this, and so I definitely, it's a risky thing, especially if you don't know much. It can be scary to explore, but I'm certainly glad I did it, and would encourage others to do that.
So I am, first of all, story that's so common, right? And that's something that I would like us to be able to change, because nobody ever asks anybody why they got into clinical psychology, because clinical psychology is so well taught and so well exposed that everybody knows that you heard about it. Like, they won't say, when did you hear about it, right? You heard about it at some point in time in your educational journey. But when you talk to IOs, the question is always, when did you hear about IO? When did you decide you were interested in IO? And every single one of our stories is through exploration, is through somebody telling us about it, because the paths to education about our field are not really robust. And so we're missing out on so much talent. And what I think I'm hearing from you is that anybody who is interested in the human and the organization, anybody who wants to make structural changes in real-ass organizations should really be considering IO. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you put it right in terms of, I mean, now there are lots of extended conversations we can have about how you have impact in organizations, right? Who should your connections be? What is your organizational problem you're trying to solve? Or is it even is it even the problem that an organization comes to you saying that it is? So like I have organizations contact me saying, well, we have a selection problem. And while I obviously do selection and testing, I enjoy it. I think it makes an impact. The initial parts of the conversation are about exploring and making sure, like, are you sure this is a selection problem? Or maybe it is a selection problem, but it's also a recruiting problem, or it's a management problem, or it's a teamwork problem. And there's no one right answer, right? There are often multiple approaches to the same problem. But I just want people to make sure that, just they can benefit from exploring the possibilities. Just like we talked about exploring a college major, exploring an organizational problem is the same thing. You want to see what all your options are before you dive in.
Perfect. And this is a perfect pivot to kind of a last sort of general topic, which is all about graduate school. And I have two kind of questions around graduate school for you on both sides of it, right? So for people who are thinking, do you want me to do both questions at once or one question at a time?
Oh no, let's see what they are.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, give them both.
Load them up. All right.
Yeah.
So the question is, for those people who are considering graduate school, what should they be doing to prepare themselves? And what should they know about that journey? Like what's like one or two key pieces of advice for them? And then on the side, for graduate schools in IO psychology, how are we doing in terms of selecting diverse talent into our programs? And could we do something differently? What could we do to improve our own selection methods in the field?
Yeah. So, these are great questions, and they can be kind of involved in terms of different considerations. I mean, to try and keep it short, I'd say as a student, as I said, I think exploring is really important to make sure you know what you want to be when you grow up, right? I started out engineering, and it was kind of like I knew that was a job that was available. Like people know there's a pipeline from the degree to the job, and it's pretty instrumental. But then to let go of that sureness, it's hard, but it's worthwhile, right? So I guess that's a long way of saying, find your fit, make sure something like IO psychology is in your ballpark, take intro to IO psychology, take related courses like personality, or maybe your school offers a measurement and testing course, see how that fits you. And then also get involved if you can in research, or at the very least reading a little bit more from like Journal of Applied Psychology to see what researchers are doing in the field. But I would say getting involved in research is really more important, not just to do the research, but to connect yourself with people in the field. And that's super important, to see what their experiences are like, see what cutting edge research is like, or see how boring research is a lot of the time, right? To really understand what the process is like. It's not, it's important, but not always as glamorous as you see in the articles. But the reason to do that is for your own, as a student, realistic preview of what IO psychologists end up doing. Regardless of the area, I'm in selection, as I said, but if you're studying diversity or management or leadership or teamwork and so on, you have to collect data, you have to analyze data. what is that process like? How do you transform, how do you get through the process from an interesting research question to some data analyses and results that inform that question and then lead to more questions probably, right? So getting engaged in some of that's super important. I think then when you apply to graduate school, you can reflect on those experiences, and people like me who are reading it can say, oh, this person knows what they're getting themselves into. So it's one thing to find promise in an applicant. It's another thing to find fit, right? So you can find people that look promising, but you don't know whether they would like it or not if they haven't tried it. So it's a way of saying I've tried it. I've not only tried it, I still like it, and then move forward. That's not to say we don't take risks and look at promising applicants that don't have experience. In those cases, it's also nice to see perhaps related research experience, and certainly clear writing. I would recommend, now this is, maybe other folks would disagree with me here, especially the people who have to read through all this stuff, but I would recommend including a writing sample even for universities that don't request it, just to put a short, or I guess what I should say is look at your application materials and make sure there's something that reflects your writing, because I think that really has an impact on people reviewing your application, that you can think clearly, coherently, and express yourself clearly. That goes a long way. So that's the student side, is trying to get yourself prepared, knowing what you're doing. On the receiving side, where we're reviewing applications and trying to shape the future of our field, really is what we're doing. I think obviously we can do a better job. We don't apply our principles of selection and organizations to selecting graduate students. To some extent, maybe we shouldn't, but to another extent, I think there are some lessons to be learned. You'd asked about diversity. I think one reason to, we talk about standardized tests, to broaden that idea of a standardized test being, it's fair in the sense that it's the same material given to all applicants, right? It exposes people, you're treating people the same way. If we broaden that to say, well, more of a standardized process for how we do admissions, I think that's right in the sense. And what I mean by that is, like, I don't know, maybe like the first few applicants that are on the top of the stack jump out at you because it was, you're fresh looking at applications, you're alert, you look at them, and then you start getting tired toward the end looking through them. It's like, is that really fair to other applicants? No, of course it's not. So you need to, take breaks and give everybody a fair look at all the materials. Nobody's life is standardized, right? So there is a balance and a careful balance you have to make between being standardized in terms of making sure you're looking at similar key aspects relevant to graduate school. So I do testing. I do think test scores are an important part of a portfolio, but they are part, let's underline part. They're part of a portfolio. So there are unique experiences that, everyone has a different research experience. You can't put that into a standardized test, but you can look at what were the key elements that were learned from the research experience. Is there convergent information from the student applicant's reflection of the experience and the recommender's letter, or letters, multiple letters? Are there other pieces of information that converge on having some research promise and potential, right? And I think, going to diversity issues, I often think some forms of lack of diversity has to do with people's inertia. They're not ill-willed. They just don't think about the ways they can make sure everyone gets a fair shake through the materials. So making sure everybody on a committee is looking through every application, I think really is important. It's a little bit hard to articulate, but I'll give you an example would be outside of graduate school is where like I'm looking for somebody to review for a journal, okay? And I see a topic and I'm like, oh, it's about safety behavior. I know exactly who to get, right? But if you do that, you lose out on not just diversity of demographics, but diversity of ideas and opinions. You say, gosh, I should probably look at a fuller list. So what do? I mean, I'm still a little bit lazy, so I go to Google Scholar. But if I spend a little bit more time than I normally do, I find early career researchers, I find people in practice that actually would help help the review process. They have current applications in practice that we don't see in academics yet, and that sort of thing. And so my point is, a little more work on the part of a committee can lead to more diversity. I think incorporating more diverse aspects, like making sure you see, hey, these people were in a variety of committees or clubs, and they took leadership positions, and they showed a lot of motivation. Those kinds of issues are important. So now I realize I'm rambling quite a bit, but I hope I'm conveying the idea that really being thorough, being careful, even though it is an imprecise process on the part of people selecting, being engaged with each other, not forming these opinions on your own and on isolated piece of information, can really improve the process for us. And then one last thing is it goes back to recruiting as well, right? You've got to, like your earlier point about education, IO, we fortunately, our professional society, SIOP, is really trying to get IO psychology into textbooks. And, it definitely starts there so that your pipeline is widened right from the onset.
And I love some of the things that you said really resonated with me. When I developed the selection system for the University of Maryland program, I had sat in on this panel that had Jim Oots on it, who was one of my mentors, a remarkable man. And he had said, why don't we use what we understand about selection and adverse impact when we design selection into educational systems? And at the time I was designing the system at the University of Maryland, I said, that's a good question. Why don't we? We can. So I did try to incorporate our best practices in selection into the system, and it is really time consuming. And exactly the piece that you mentioned that is so important is that intentional effort, because the way our brains are wired to work is through shortcuts.
Right.
We cannot process all the stimuli in our environment. And so our brains automatically have lots of shortcuts, and those shortcuts become heuristics. Those heuristics are the formation of stereotypes. So
exactly.
That is the natural functioning of the brain.
Right.
And intention and effort to overcome that. I've had applicants that I have spent 2 months thinking about.
All right.
Going back to the applications, going back to the interview notes, going back to the other interview notes, and really thinking about that. I think to your point, which I love, to your points, which I love, I think that when we are selecting people into graduate study, we really need to take seriously our role as gatekeepers to the profession. IO is a field that is governed by whether or not you have a graduate degree in IO, truly. And so when we do gatekeeping into graduate study, we do gatekeeping into the field. And I really, I think if we take our role in that place seriously, when we say no to somebody, what we might be doing is saying, no, you are not allowed to enter IO. And we say yes to somebody, we say, yes, you may enter our field. And so that's a huge responsibility, and it deserves effort and intention. Not everything deserves the same level of effort and intention. And that piece truly, truly does. And I love the points that you bring up, because you are so right.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's great to be right. No, but
I don't hear that all the time.
No, but more seriously, I love what you said, because you got me thinking more broadly about how can we help students find possible fits to graduate programs. So in other words, it's not us saying you don't belong here, you do belong here. instead it's saying, you know, we're often doing selection within our own institution. Why don't we have a broader framework for what the institutions offer? And that helps students search better. It might, you know, it might make institutions compete. You know, if you can manage that in positive ways, it can make them better, right? And it can help institutions seek out what is unique about them.
Yes.
And anyway, I'll have to think about that. But I think the idea that a student could go in and, you know, rather than kind of piecemeal think about their own what options are available to them, just like your point about intentional kind of consideration review, you make their search more intentional and helpful by providing, if more institutions can provide the information within a systematic framework, right? So
Yes, I love that, because what that requires of us is a true commitment to our field. Because it's not about, and I always tell incoming students about other programs that I know, and tell the not incoming students.
yeah, I do too. Yeah.
Look them up, look into them. Here are some of the distinctions. I will never say anything bad about another program.
Mm-hmm.
It's the point of it. It's not about what's good and what's bad. I know what my program is about. And if a student really wants that, then I want them to be here because they want that. But there might be other better fits that work better for them. And I really love it, because that is necessary for our field to really thrive. We're not a big field. We're not a big field, but we could be, I do think we are the best field. And I think we could be so much more powerful if we came together in support of each other in these ways, as opposed to as fixed pie. It's so much pie for everybody.
So much pie.
Here.
I love pie, particularly under home confinement here with COVID-19. I guess we're lucky so far, and the food is available. But you know, when we get out of this, yeah, I think we'll still, maybe we need each other more to ensure the success and viability of how effective, you know, our profession can be. And it is, you know, implied here is some faith that institutions that would go to the time and trouble to participate in building kind of a better, more informative framework for people seeking graduate programs, that they're going to benefit from it, you know, and not assume that it's going to be worse or not worth it. But, you know, if we can, you know, the benefits are, I think, multiple. And one thing students should realize as well, and they may hear this in form letters or form emails, but it's really true when we say there are more deserving students than we can possibly admit into our program. It's true. It's painful.
It's heartbreaking.
But it is really true. I've seen so many promising applicants, and you know, we have limited funds. Sometimes we can't admit students at all in a given year. Or, you know, on the other side of it, sometimes we graduate a lot of students, and that frees up money for the department, or grants come in and we have more money available. So there's an ebb and flow to what we can, you know, who we can admit. And so when we say that, you know, we're not admitting you and it's not personal, it really is truly not personal in many respects. There are a lot of constraints. So, you know, the other thing I find out is, you know, we all, in large part, if you're looking to go to graduate school, you don't get in a particular school, you know, I guess this is advice to students, is what I'm trying to give, is be proactive, be persistent, keep looking for promising options. You can never put your eggs in one basket. I mean, this is true when you as a researcher, when you submit papers to journals, right? You can't put all your hopes on one option. You have to try multiple options, and eventually, if you're persistent, you know, you believe in your ideas and you improve on them. You listen to feedback, but don't over listen. Don't be paralyzed by feedback. Really balance your center, where you try and find what the core message is of what you're trying to do in the case of applying to grad school, or what you're trying to say in a paper. Balance that center with the advice you're getting back, and be proactive and network with the people around you that can support you, that want to support you. And I think that'll lead to good outcomes. Usually it does.
Perfect. That is a perfect wrap up. Thank you so much for joining
Oh, thank you.
today, Fred. And yeah, so thank you so much for joining us on the Soapbox. And
Okay.
to seeing you when we're out of this world.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Glad to participate and happy to do so again. So take care.
Take care.